Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world today. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a really interesting webinar on tap today with some great speakers, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand. We'll be sending out a link post-event in an email that you'll be able to access the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So at any time during the presentation, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we'll take some time after the presentation to go through those audience questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and dive right on into today's webinar, which is Cover Your SaaS, Best Practices in SaaS Monitoring. That is one sassy title, if I don't say so. Okay, we have three really great speakers today. Our first panelist is Mehdi Daoudi, who is CEO and co-founder of Catchpoint. And he's going to be joined by Ben Becker, who's Senior Systems Engineer at HubSpot, and Vandan Desai, who's Senior Product Manager at Catchpoint. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining me today. Mehdi, I know that you're going to be kicking us off, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you do your thing.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us for that very sassy title as we just went over. So you typically hear about Catchpoint when it comes to monitoring your external infrastructure, making sure that your online e-commerce and services are working, your DNS is working. However, one of the trends that we're seeing is actually the performance and availability problems that typically plague or that we hear about from an outside perspective are starting to creep inside the organization. At the last earnings call of Microsoft, Microsoft claimed to have 1.2 billion users on Office 365, servicing over 60 million companies around the world. So the challenges that people face these days is, yes, there is a cloud adoption that is happening for your production environments, but there is a much bigger and faster trend, which is the adoption of SaaS applications to run a company, whether it's an HR system, a payroll system, PTO systems, CRM solutions, and the list goes on and on. We did a survey at Catchpoint, and we're a company of 174 employees, and we use 130 different SaaS applications. So this is a fairly big problem across the world, where everybody is again moving to software as a service because it's much easier to run, much easier to maintain, and you don't have to go through CapEx and maintain those servers running a system that only works once a month or at the end of the quarter. So this is the trend that we're seeing, and obviously with this comes a lot of challenges. I don't know how many of you have gone through this, but in my previous life, this was very familiar. You get an email or a call from the CEO or someone that says email is down, or our intranet is down, and I want it fixed now, and I don't even know why it's not working. And so there is a loss of productivity. There is no visibility into what's happening, or is that user at a Starbucks coffee? Is that user or that particular user working from home? Is Time Warner having a problem? Is their DNS system working or not? So the performance issues that, again, we tend to see on the outside are starting to creep up inside, and it's just much more complex these days to pinpoint, just because now that SaaS solution is not inside your data center. So it's very hard to figure out what's going on. Do you go to downdetector.com? Do you call Office 365 support? Do you open a ticket? So these are the kind of things that a lot of people are dealing with. So there is a real cost to not having visibility into your SaaS applications, performance and availability. The biggest one we see is productivity. We have customers where they have a call center with about 300-400 employees, and when that CRM solution is having technical difficulties, you have to send those people home, so they might get at least some work done from home. So the productivity the productivity loss is incredible. Obviously, that translates into a bottom line impact. If that same call center that is handling sales, for example, cannot fulfill its mission, and people have to go home and commute for like 2 hours, etc. That day might as be is completely lost. The other thing that we've seen is employees that work with the SaaS applications that are not always performing or performing poorly, either because of the SaaS app itself or because of the environment where the employees are. There is a direct impact to employee satisfaction. Nobody likes to work with slow applications. Why do things work at home? Why can I go home and say, Alexa, turn on the lights, but then when I get to the office, our CRM is not working? So these are the three main things that we see when it comes to impact when SaaS applications don't behave properly. Obviously, each business is different. Every company has different ways of calculating outages. These are just some ideas in terms of how much a 2-hour downtime on a critical piece of a company's applications will cost to a company. So the same way we have calculations on the average downtime cost from an outside perspective, inside is as bad. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, not only in productivity, bottom line impact, and employee satisfaction at the end of the day. So this is a real big problem. So obviously, we applied the same methodology when it comes to monitoring to SaaS monitoring. So you cannot rely on the vendors to tell you whether or not they're up or down, even though some of them have status pages. A lot of those status pages are manually updated, therefore not in real time. So it's extremely important to be proactive about monitoring, the same way we recommend proactive monitoring to ensure the customer experience. Your internal employees are customers as well, so it's important to monitor proactively. It's also very important to monitor from where the users are. If you have a call center in the Philippines, or in India, or in the middle of Texas, you must monitor from those locations, because each one of them has its own different profiles, different connectivity, different provider, different DNS setup maybe. Some might have QoS enabled on their router, some might not. So it's very important to monitor from those various locations. And it's also extremely important to reduce the time to troubleshoot, to monitor all the components. So for example, if you're using a big CRM company, .com, you want to monitor it from all the locations where that CRM solution is being used. But it's also important to make sure that, hey, can I resolve CRM.com from those different locations as well? If that solution is using a CDN, can I reach that content distribution network? So it's very important when you look at the SaaS solution that you're using, to look at all the components they use, whether they have multiple DNS providers, multiple CDN providers, which network path I take from my office to that location. So therefore, you can reduce the time to troubleshoot if somebody raised their hand and say, hey, we're having a problem with crmsolution.com. So this is the path that we've seen work a lot for companies that have deployed SaaS monitoring solutions to reduce that time to troubleshoot. Very similar to in typical operations shop, we talk about mean time to repair. Mean time to repair is driven by detection, identification, escalation, and fixing. With a SaaS provider, there is not much fixing we can all do. We're at the mercy of them. However, if you can detect early that there is a problem, you might be able to tell the employees, hey, work from home instead of going to the office. You might win some productivity. And then it's also important to be able to say, well, we're having issues getting to crm.com because it's a DNS. So again, troubleshooting, reducing the time to troubleshoot is extremely important. Another thing that is extremely important, and we see this more and more, is the importance of service level management and being able to hold those vendors accountable. So it's very important not to rely necessarily on the SLAs that they provide, because typically they are unmeasurable. So it's very important to use your own methods and your own methodologies and your own set of tools to monitor that service provider. And it's also very important for that data to be shareable. So therefore, the numbers don't lie, and it's very hard to dispute numbers, especially when they're monitored by a third-party solution. So it's also very important to go back and provide the data to that vendor and say, hey, last week everything was okay, but this week is bad. Or like, hey, you know, this is something we see every third week. So it's very important that whatever monitoring solution you use to hold your vendors accountable from a service level management, to be able to go back in the past and be able to detect trends, to be able to detect similarities either by hour of the day, by day of the week, etc. So if you're using a tool that only holds data for 7 days or 3 days, that's not manageable in the long term. So there is a very big and important piece around service level management as companies migrate to more and more SaaS solutions. So this is the SaaS experience delivery chain. This is the way we look at it ourselves, even at Catchpoint, when it comes to monitoring our SaaS applications that we use. So we have multiple offices around the world. We have also remote offices. People use PCs, Mac, iPads, etc. We have different network providers, even in each building. Typically, we have 2 carriers that bring network capabilities into the offices. Then you're dealing with the backbone of the internet, whether it's Zayo in New York or Cogent in other places. Then we're dealing with either the DNS providers of the SaaS application or our own DNS. So in our case, for example, we use OpenDNS to provide an extra layer of protection when it comes to malware and things like that. But you know, is CRM.com working okay with and without OpenDNS, for example? So it's very important for you to map out how your users, your employees, are accessing those SaaS applications from the various locations you have, and be able to make sure, okay, I need to monitor all these moving parts, because if you don't, you're going to waste a lot of time trying to identify which one of these pieces is causing issues. So this is the SaaS experience delivery chain. So one of the features we released a few months ago at Catchpoint is the ability to leverage our synthetic monitoring offer from within the offices, where you can deploy Catchpoint inside the virtual machine in a physical little compute system. And one of the things we did is we released what we call template SaaS synthetic monitoring templates. So where customers don't have to script or write Selenium scripts, you literally have a drop down and you say, I want to monitor Office 365 Outlook or OneNote or Slack or Workday. And so it's very easy to be able to monitor that and to deploy these monitoring solutions. So obviously, as I said, we drink our own champagne at Catchpoint. I was going to use, we eat our own dog food, but I prefer the champagne piece. So we set up these templates for ourselves, and then we open it up for the rest of our customers a few months ago, as I said. I'm going to give you an example. So we deployed Catchpoint devices in every one of our office from a synthetic perspective, in our office in Bangalore, in Boston, in Los Angeles, and New York. And we're literally measuring the performance of each one of the SaaS applications we rely on. Without them, we will come to a complete stop. And as you can see here, this particular example is just one of the SaaS providers we use, which is a CRM solutions. DNS performance is just horrible from India. So this allowed us to open a ticket with that particular CRM solution to try to see if we can improve the DNS latency and the DNS TTL times in this particular case. So these are some of the real life examples that actually impacted us. So we have 70 employees in India, in Bangalore, and their performance with that CRM was just not acceptable to them, to us, and so we had to fix it. It's also very important to, when you're choosing a CRM solution, and we've had experiences with some customers that were looking at a CRM solution one versus another. And so they deployed our enterprise nodes in all their offices to measure the performance of one versus one. And performance was one of the many criterias in choosing one of those solutions, because some solutions are much lightweight than others, and so that was a key requirement for them, because if their offices had very limited bandwidth capabilities in some locations. It's also very important to be able to alert on the issues and be able to detect those outages as quickly as possible and send alerts to your corporate IT, your operations center, your service operations center, and be able to alert people that, hey, we're going to have a barrage of emails and phone calls because CRM solution one or Slack is having a problem. Or like what happened to us a few weeks ago, actually last week, sorry, we rely on Zoom as a conferencing system, and they had a 2-hour outage, and we had a barrage of emails and phone calls from all of our employees because they couldn't use that service. This is an example of a waterfall. So this is very widely used in web performance testing or web monitoring in general, but this is also now becoming very important for SaaS monitoring because, again, these solutions are deployed via the web. So it's very important to look at every detail of the page, every component of the page to see what is causing the bottleneck. Is it in this particular case, is it Salesforce.com, or is it a third party that is being loaded within Salesforce? This data, again, can be shared with the vendor. So you can show them, not just tell them, you can show them visually with the screenshots and film strips where problems are happening. So there is no more, oh, I think it's you, I think it's your network. No, we're seeing the problem on the outside. This is another view into that, which is from a networking perspective. It's very important not only to monitor the web page response of a particular SaaS application, but how does each office get there? And is the network one of the layers that might be causing some issues? So in this particular case, we're doing a trace route using either TCP or UDP or ASMP, depending on what endpoint you're monitoring, and being able to see how do we get there, and during an outage or during a slowdown, are we going through a different path from a network perspective? For example, when things are working well, we're going through Verizon, but when things are not going well, we're going through some other ISP, for example. So being able to look historically at the path that is taken can explain a lot of issues sometimes. As I mentioned, service level management is extremely important in this case, both internally as an organization. I think it's very important to drive an organization based on metrics, IT metrics, I mean. And it's also very important from a third party to share the data with them and hold them accountable by either pushing them to fix their issues, but also get credits back or get some kind of compensation. So this is a service level management dashboard that basically can go back and look at over time what was the availability and performance by month, by quarter, by year to date, and all of this is obviously very customizable and color coded, so when things go bad they turn red, obviously. I think we've covered this, so I'm going to skip this. So excellent. So this is Catchpoint SaaS Monitoring. These are some of the challenges that we're trying to solve for many of our customers. And I'm going to pass this to Ben, who works at HubSpot and actually does this for a living. Ben?
Hi, thanks for having me. So my name is Ben Becker. I'm a senior systems engineer at HubSpot, and what my team is mostly responsible for is the actual keeping every internal tool that we have, be it SaaS, be it custom, be it internally deployed on premises, up and running. And for us, this is the key reason for us going with Catchpoint. The idea that we could have something in our own data centers, in our own offices, their enterprise node, and report on basically the employee experience at every level. This was key for us because as a global company, the mandate from our CIO is to make sure that everyone gets a really good experience. In addition, to echo Mehdi, the SLAs are huge to us, and we've often had to use our Catchpoint monitoring to go to some of our vendors, especially our single sign-on vendor or our alerting vendor, to say like, hey, you guys are giving us stuff, but you are not really meeting it. So because I forget to do slides, service level management. We're basically operating under the philosophy that it's better to tell people early about a problem than let them find it themselves. And it's better to be aggressive in being public about these problems. As the earlier mentioned Zoom issue, there was a period of time where they knew about the issue and didn't tell anyone. And through Catchpoint monitoring, we were able to see that essentially that failure before it actually happened. I'm really going off script. People are going to kill me. But for all of our SaaS stuff, we religiously use this just because when we have issues, my user base is very, very vocal about them. And this gives us the opportunity to get ahead of it, which builds trust, which builds this idea that we're looking out for them. And that, if we give them a system, we'll, be sure it works as much as it can, or we'll actually, give alternatives so that we can keep people moving. Where's the wrong screen? So this is the Zoom outage. Zoom has its own status page, so they were able to tell people, hey, we're having our outage, it's ongoing. And they started reporting issues at about 12:25-ish. But according to the Catchpoint monitoring, this was just that same day. You can see that their response time was actually perfectly, within a little bit of a waiver, but was perfectly flat. And then it spikes and goes crazy. And that we were able to pinpoint that as the beginning of their problems. Any SaaS vendor or any engineer in general doesn't want to admit to a possible outage until they're sort of forced to, until too many people notice, until the support lines light up. And with Catchpoint, we don't have to sort of depend on the vendor to admit there's a problem, that we can actually see the problem, get alerted to it, then see the problem and actually identify that there's an ongoing issue, but also when that issue is resolved. And in this case, Zoom was out for a little while, and we were at least able to tell our salespeople that there was something ongoing and that they should start trying to reschedule things. I actually had a call with someone that day, and I think 2 people couldn't even join the call. So early monitoring of the SaaS vendors, just so you can give people time to prep and shift, is key. Now this is a bit of a mishmash slide. I gave the wrong images, but basically this is 2 things, and I'll talk about both of them. One is that we have Looker internally at HubSpot, and the enterprise nodes allow us to monitor things that don't exist on the broader internet. And that broader internet, or things that are internal to HubSpot only, we need to monitor, but we also need to monitor in such a way that it's not susceptible to any of our own systems sort of going down accidentally. And the data is accessible outside of our network. So basically, if the whole network were to go down, but something's living in AWS East, we could actually use our phones or a different network or a different provider to figure out if, if is it our problem, is it a global problem, is it every office? So in this case, we've been having problems with Looker, and we have our own internal SaaS page. We are vocal about posting on Slack so that people know. And people really do depend on this stuff, especially towards the end of the month. So in this particular case, you're looking at a graph that shows the response time of our on-premises Jira node. And, this is a few days at a time, and you can easily see how it was relatively steady for most of it until it starts freaking out. And all of a sudden, the response time goes up. That's the web page response, but just the time, the Synac response time just goes crazy. The funny thing about this graph is that at the very end, towards the 23rd, you see everything go back to normal. That's because that was the actual point where Jira fell over. So after Jira falls over, we're then able to go back and look at the data and see that, this actually started 3 days previous. And we could have intervened at any time or set up a non-emergency reboot of the system and headed off that eventual crash during the middle of the day. And this was key because then after this event happened, we went back into Catchpoint, set up some new alerting to look for these kind of issues specifically. And that way we were able to see them before they happened again. We were able to mitigate them. And eventually what ended up happening was that we were using a MySQL backend, and something in Jira was just eating up database connections and not letting them go. And what's funny is that it took 3 days to actually roll to a stop. In the end, this was fixed by just changing the database backend to Postgres. So when I speak about globally, we have a good presence in the in Asia and Australia. We have 2 offices in Europe and are opening up a 3rd in 2019, as well as 2 offices in North America and 1 in South America. And the key thing is that to encourage that trust and to encourage people to adhere to whatever processes their teams have built, we actually need to know that their access to these systems are all okay, and that we're not eating away at their time because they're sitting around waiting for web pages to be returned. And by doing that, before we actually deployed the enterprise nodes, everything was all anecdotal. We had ideas that things might be slow, but we never had any data. And Catchpoint was key in allowing us to get that data so that now we know, okay, we need to deploy data center nodes in Singapore and Tokyo, and then use DNS load balancing to make sure that everyone gets an acceptable time. If these things become pain points for people, they will actually start ignoring the process, find their own tools, and basically become their own splinter company, which is something we try to avoid at all costs. So we really want to try to make sure that every HubSpot employee in every HubSpot office is a first-class citizen, in that they get the same level of support that you would get at our headquarters in Cambridge. In addition, having this kind of data from all these offices really allows us to fight back against a very common user problem, which is the slowness problem. Like, the computer seems slow. Okay, well, your experience of slow is going to be drastically different from mine. You're also the only one using this computer, so none of us actually understand what the slowness might be. At least this way, with the Catchpoint monitoring in place, we can go, okay, according to our data, your office and this SaaS vendor, they are operating perfectly fine. So now we are pretty sure the problem is on your computer, or it could just be their perception of it. But the whole idea is, like, when you're dealing with these impossible to quantify problems like slowness, having the data to back up that the systems outside of the user are functioning properly and are functioning in a speedy way is key to getting to the root of that problem as quickly as possible. And I think that is it for me. Thank you for having me, folks.
Thank you so much, Ben.
All right. So basically, on the Catchpoint tool, we as many pointed out, like there are multiple ways that you can monitor your SaaS applications by writing scripts or Selenium scripts as we allow. And what we have done is basically make sure that what we have done in our application today is we have given the ability to create these tests really simple and easy. Once that's done, you can set up these tests for all your applications and monitor them from all your locations that you have. And you can create alerts. You can look at your data and see how your applications are performing. I'm going to jump to our application and give you a quick demo on how these tests can be set up, and we'll take it from there. So this is our Catchpoint application dashboard, and as Mary pointed out that we drink our own champagne, we have tests set up on all of our 4 locations, and we are continuously monitoring our SaaS applications. So traditionally, we would set up something like this to monitor a SaaS application where you write a Selenium script to log into the application, perform a couple of tasks, and then log out. And then you would benchmark against those. And problem with that was like you have to maintain these scripts. Anytime a vendor changes something, you have to go and make sure that you go and make the changes for these scripts again. The other issue that we have noticed is there's no prior warning before something changes. So you only realize that something has gone wrong when your tests start failing or they start showing you non-relevant data. So what we have done at Catchpoint is we have made this really simple. We allow you to create these tests from templates, as you can see over here, and we have multiple templates. We are adding more applications every single day, so you should be able to get any application that you want to monitor from here. We have a bunch of tests set up over here, and once when you want to create any tests, what we are doing over here is we are only asking you to provide a name for your test and the URL that is unique to your application. So a lot of SaaS vendors either rely on a single URL and then they determine the access based on your email, or you have a unique URL to access your application. So in this case, SharePoint, it has a unique URL to our company. And so we put this input over here, and that's it. You set this up. Once it is set up, you can basically monitor this. And as you can see over here, we have been monitoring SharePoint from all our 4 locations in Bangalore, Boston, LA, and New York. And you can see this in the smart board, how well it plays. It shows me the downtime, if there was any in an event, as to when it occurred. And you can see the spike over there when the downtime happened. We do show you a lot of other information where you have all the information by city, you have it all by an IP address, and if you have multiple ISP providers, the ISP provider information detail is also displayed over here. One of the other things that we also allow to do is a lot of these SaaS applications are behind an SSO provider. So for example, a lot of users do use Okta or OneLogin, and some of them also rely on Google as well as Microsoft Live. So in this particular example, what we have done is we have tried to mimic the real world example of how the user would log in. So generally, when I walk into the office, I log into Microsoft, it asks me for my username password, and once I log in, for the next few hours, I'm not really logging into my application again. It has an authentication cookie on my laptop. It picks it up and it authenticates me and goes directly to the application. So in this case, we have done something very similar. We also rely on Microsoft Live. So there is a separate test that you have set up for Microsoft Live that does a login. That runs every couple of hours for now, and we store the authentication cookie in a global variable, which is shared with the Microsoft login apps. So in this case, my SharePoint does not even require me to provide them a username or password. It just picks up the global variable and logs you in. So it gives you a true experience of how you are looking at these steps. So if you can see a particular waterfall for this test, we'll notice that the first step is generally whenever you try to access an application, it redirects you to the Microsoft login page. And once it finds the cookie, without entering any username and password, it just straight away goes to the SharePoint homepage. So this way, we are monitoring the SharePoint page. We know exactly how long it's taking, what the performance is, how every location the performance is, and how it is basically impacting us from our productivity standpoint. Thank you.
Okay, great. I am assuming at this point you guys are done with the presentation, or Mehdi, do you have any other words you want to speak before we go into the Q&A?
No, one of the things that we heard from Ben at HubSpot, which is something that always sticks with me, is the fact that they're treating, or they want to provide, the first-class experience to all their employees. And especially when we live in a world where not only we're adopting SaaS applications, but we're all finding employees wherever we can. So we're also living in a world where remote work is acceptable, encouraged. To some point, there is no choice. And so that first-class experience is extremely important, especially in a remote work environment. So what we talked today about is synthetic monitoring from your offices to keep an eye on these SaaS applications. Towards the end of February, we're going to be releasing the companion to the synthetic piece, which is more of a real user product that basically will now tell you exactly which person is having which problem with which service. So the synthetic is more for proactive. It's a black box monitoring concept. We're going to introduce the companion to it, which is going to give you that real perspective of each employee in relation to their to the SaaS performance they're having. So stay tuned, there is more coming. This is a very big problem that a lot of companies are trying to solve, and we're working with them to bring better visibility, observability, and also actionability in terms of dealing with some of these outages. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, great. Well, at this point, we'll go ahead and move on to the Q&A part of our presentation today. If you have a question for any of our panelists, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, first question, guys. Let's see. Can I identify when an issue reported from an employee is due to an Office network problem or the SaaS platform?
So that's a great question. So this is exactly what the, the example that Ben was talking about, which is when somebody complains about an issue, an employee, there are a lot of layers that can cause that problem. It can be his computer or her computer. It can be the office that person is in. It can be the SaaS application. So when we're trying to troubleshoot a problem, the goal, or our job number one, is how can we go through those layers of that onion and peel them as quickly as possible so we can go back to that person and say, listen, everything is okay, we're not seeing a problem, everything is clean, it must be you. So then you can focus and you can send somebody to look at the PC or the Mac, or rather than, oh my God, we don't know what's going on. So So by using these things, you can clearly identify, is this a network issue within the office? Is it a DNS issue within the office? Or is it something outside on the internet from the office to the network it connects to? Or is it something specific to that SaaS application? Because if you have deployed this in all your locations or every floor, we've seen weirdness sometimes within floors of a particular office. Then you can go back and say, well, listen, all of our offices are reporting a problem, so it must be the SaaS application because it can't be the internet at that point.
Okay, all right, great. Next question, let's see. What are common issues with SaaS that you have seen?
The common issues across all the SaaS applications?
Right, right. That using a SaaS as opposed to say
Sure,
an on-premises.
sure. I think a lot of the SaaS applications, and I can let some of my other colleagues talk about this. One of the biggest thing we've seen is not every SaaS application is leveraging a global footprint. So we've seen that with certain solutions where you sign up, like your company is headquartered in Chicago, and you sign up with them, so they create a SaaS instance of their solution for you in the Chicago area. However, you have employees all around the world, or from South Africa to Asia to any Europe, and their performance profile is going to be very different than the performance profile of the employees in Chicago. And what Ben said something very important as well earlier. It's all sometimes you have to set the expectations as well with the employees. Like, hey guys, we're going to switch to this solution. It's a great solution. There are all these benefits. However, the folks in Madrid are going to have a much different experience from the folks in Chicago. Just you know just know about it, versus, hey, this is great, it works everywhere, you roll it out, and then people start complaining about, hey, our performance is bad, or we can't reach it. And so it's very important to set the expectations with the employees about performance. It's also very important to know that at some point people don't complain, and so somebody's going to open a ticket about the slowness of something the first time. The second time they might not do it. So what you end up dealing with is a bunch of employees that are very unsatisfied about the SaaS product that you're forcing them to use, and but you don't know about it. So it becomes almost like a silent killer. So you don't want that. So obviously performance profiles is one of the biggest thing we see. And then the second one that I've seen, and I think Ben also alluded to it with the Zoom outage, is it took a while for somebody to go on a status page and say, hey, we're having a problem. But that 5 minute or 10 minute that sometimes it takes for the SaaS solutions to go and write something on a status page, you're literally left on your own to try to figure out what's going on. So if your company is 2 people, that's easy. You turn around and you ask your coworker, hey, is it just you? But when you're talking about a company the size of HubSpot or any other big, large company, you're talking about like 1,000 people sending emails to the CIT or the corporate IT, hey, are we down or something wrong? And it just becomes a cascading effect. So that's the other thing we notice is just like how long it takes for these SaaS applications to notify their users via any method that they're having a problem.
All right, great. We've gotten some really good questions in so far, but there's still plenty of time. So please use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. Next question. Okay, this is an interesting one. I'm looking for a retry option in my test script. Let's say my script failed due to some issue in the SaaS service I'm trying to access. I just want to retry that step before I fail that script. Can I do it from the script? Or is there any feature to retry?
Madam, you want to take that?
Yeah. So generally, we don't have the ability to just retry that one single step, but we have the feature for instant test where you can quickly take that script and run an instant test to see what exactly is going on. And the beauty about instant test is you run the instant test on whatever node you want to run on, and you can see the results immediately right there. So that is one of the ways where we recommend to see if all your steps are working. If something is not working, you can go and fix it right then and there, and before you go and schedule it on for running it regularly.
But
Did I answer your
we also do have a retry feature built in, where basically if you,
Yes.
you have a script that fails, it will retry 10 seconds later from that same location.
Yes.
All right, great. I'm sure that's good news. Okay, next question. We are looking at multiple SaaS monitoring solutions, including Catchpoint and Logic Monitor. In what ways and categories is Catchpoint stronger than Logic Monitor?
Hey, this is Ben from HubSpot. We actually use both. Logic Monitor is really great at getting the very node level data of telling you how your system is performing in terms of disk I/O, memory, processor, and all of that stuff. But when it comes to more of an application monitoring, we found that their synthetic monitoring was not really human enough. Like I think in our original testing, we found they couldn't do redirects. They weren't using a real browser. They were using I think Phantom.js or something similar. And so yes, we could have emulated the all of our scripting in Logic Monitor, but it wouldn't have felt true. It would have felt very manufactured, because we would have been like creating the post message and this kind of stuff, instead of Catchpoint, where we just say, okay, here's your password, here's your username, click that button, wait for the page to load, do stuff in the website, then log out. Like, so we're really trying to interact with the website, because that interaction gives us information, because like the database is functioning, the CDN is functioning, the actual application layer is functioning. So it's like, it's very important to do that whole beginning to end process, because if you break at the SaaS level or at the single sign-on level, you'll never get to the end of it.
Yeah.
But if you are just directly sort of crafting your script to make all of those requests without ever talking to the server, it's not really an actual test. It's like you're testing the server's ability to respond to particular requests, but servers are going to do several things like in concert to get to where you actually need to go. So that was why we looked at Catchpoint specifically for the synthetic enterprise on-premises monitoring, is because it got the closest to a human than that we could really find.
Yeah, it's very important to echo Ben's answer. It's extremely important to use real browsers. And so from our nodes that you deploy, you can rely on IE and Internet Explorer 11 and on Chrome, the latest version, to do the scripting. And because it's very important to test, again, every element. So if there is a JavaScript that is corrupt that SaaS company has, it's going to break what the user experience is going to be in real life. So it's extremely important to measure from where it matters the most, and using the browsers that your employees are using.
All right, great. Okay, next question. How good is your integration support with other monitoring solutions like Datadog or Wavefront? Can we push results to those platforms for single pane of glass as part of overlay of observability or of synthetic and white box metrics? That was a mouthful.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, an awesome question. So the foundation of Catchpoint has been around our openness in terms of letting customers drive the product itself via API. So you can set up all your tests via API without logging into the system. But most importantly is also pushing the data. So we support different ways. We have an alert API integration, so we can integrate with the PagerDuty, Ops Genies of the world, Slack, etc. And then we have what we call a real-time push data capability that allows us to to send data in JSON or XML or whatever format you want directly to an endpoint. So as soon as we run one of your tests, you get the data. Or you can use a REST API to come in and fetch the data for a particular test or series of tests. And you can pull that and basically integrate it with whatever system you have. So we're very open. We want to be a great gear in the toolbox that people have to use these days to keep their organization up and running.
Excellent. Okay. All right. We are about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We still have time for, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 more questions. The next one, when using a template, does it automatically get updated as needed? If automatic, how does it know when to update? And does Catchpoint keep different versions of template and picks the right one for a customer's use of SaaS application?
Yes, so basically we have a team at Catchpoint who maintains all the scripts. So what that does for you is it takes the headache away from you to maintain these things. Second, we do have a version control where we do maintain different versions of scripts. So for example, if Microsoft changed something really, really small, but it required us to go and update the script, it'll be a minor version update. But what that will do is it'll automatically just go and update your test that is using that template. And you wouldn't even, I think the only place that you would realize is in your final waterfall or your charts, where you notice that because of the minor update that Microsoft made, your response time may either have gone up or down. The other part was we will keep different versions. So if Microsoft, say example, they come and completely change the way they log in or the way they access a particular application, in that case, what we would do is we would push out a major update version. And in this case, it is a user consent where we would ask you that, hey, we have a new version available. And the older version is going to be deprecated in, say, about 60 days. So you have 60 days to upgrade your script. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is hit this button, upgrade, provide the necessary information if there was any, and your scripts are automatically upgraded to use the latest version.
All right, great. Next question. Is it possible to monitor the network in both directions instead of only one direction from node to the target?
It's a little bit hard to do unless that particular SaaS application gives us permission to put a node on their end. However, we're working on some solutions that potentially can bridge that gap. For SaaS applications that are running on, for example, Microsoft Azure, we have an integration with Microsoft Network Watcher, which is actually a great tool to do the bi-directional network capability. But this is something that we're looking at solving, but it's not an easy task.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, great. Next question. I'm already doing APM monitoring on my network. Isn't that going to tell me how my users are experiencing SaaS tools?
No, it's very hard to do that because again, application performance management is a required capability when it comes to monitoring your own environment. So it will look at your applications, your databases, your code, and look at problems there. But if you're HubSpot, there is no way you can knock at the door of Zoom and say, "Hey, can you run this for me?" Right? So that barrier between the SaaS applications and their customers is very physical. So an APM solution is not going to help in this case.
Okay. All right, great. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see. Okay, so we are using Catchpoint, and at this point setting up an on-prem node. We wanted to know if there is a way to monitor our on-prem node and configure failover.
The immediate question in my mind is, are you using the Windows node, which is more of a black box, or are you using the Linux version that you can deploy yourself and monitor your server however you wish? If it's the Windows black box, hopefully you're running it on as a virtual machine, so you can actually see some what's going on inside from the outside. If it's a Linux box, monitor however you want.
Okay, they replied both Windows and Linux.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we see people do use is so a node is can be one machine or can be multiple machine. So let's say you have an office called Los Angeles. For example, in our office in Los Angeles, we have one node, but behind it there are three machines. So all three of them basically load balance each other in terms of what tests they run and capacity. And in the event that one goes down, then it's not a problem because you still have two that can handle the load. So I would look at that. The other thing is, from a monitoring perspective, whether you're running a Windows or Linux node, if you go into your node management, you can see how busy the nodes are, if they're running tests or not, which test is consuming more traffic than others, etc. But we can always follow up offline and get back to you with maybe some tips and solutions.
Awesome. All right, great. I think we have time for one more question. I'm using SSO to log into my SaaS apps. How do I monitor my SaaS application beyond my SSO provider?
So I think I covered that in the demo part. So we do allow setting up SSO-based applications. So we cover Okta, OneLogin, Microsoft, and Google at this point. And the way our templates are built, especially for Microsoft and Google, is you set up your login test on each of these applications, and then you can set up your application tests separately. Your login tests are typically scheduled to run every couple of hours, and then you can have these application tests use the login information from those from the previous tests that you created to log into your application. So this way you are not creating multiple tests that is repeating the first login sequence again and again to run on different nodes.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, it looks like we're 3 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately that is all the time that we have for the Q&A session. If we did not get to your question, I'm very sorry. We got to as many as we could. Please know that the folks at Catchpoint are getting a copy of all of the questions, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. I also want to thank everybody who did submit questions. There were tons of them, and they were all great. So thank you very much. Want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or you just want to listen to it again, you will be able to. We are going to be sending out an email shortly after today's webinar that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go there to check it out. Just go under the webinars tab on demand, and it should be right there waiting for you. And while you're there, please feel free to look around, check out the other webinars that we have, both upcoming and on demand, and hopefully there'll be one or two that pique your interest. Gentlemen, Mehdi, Ben, and Vandam, thank you, all three of you, for giving such a great and insightful presentation. Good stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Ben, for participating. Thank you.
Great, great. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.